Hello and welcome to another episode of Spart Talk. Today we're going to discuss the election of Catherine Connolly as President of Ireland, something that's caused a fair bit of excitement on the left. So, for example, the Socialist Party, that's the group of the ISA in Ireland, writes, Catherine Connolly trounces right-wing political establishment. Others on the left have dubbed it a historic victory for the left, noting that this is the first time the left has won a majority of votes in a national election in Ireland. So, in the playbook of the left, Connolly is being seen as part of the same wave of momentum that's behind your party in Britain or Zoran Mamdani in New York, hardly pausing to look at the political programs and forces behind these different developments. So what we want to do today is try and make sense of Connolly and her victory by looking at what's actually going on in Ireland. And it seems that things are far from rosy. For instance, 2 days before she was declared victor, there were far-right riots that broke out in Dublin. So to dive into the dynamics at play in Ireland, I've got with me Comrade Eibhlin. Hi, Eibhlin.
Hi, Mansa. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for making the time. I'm really excited to get into Ireland. So, what was your reaction to the election of Connolly, and how should we make sense of it?
My reaction, in a nutshell, was more to the excitement generated in the Irish left about the election of Catherine Connolly, who's, a liberal woman as president. My reaction was more, my goodness, here goes the Irish left trying to prolong the shelf life of the liberal era in Ireland against the direction of travel in world politics.
Right. And I think that's partly why the left was so excited, because they're like, oh, look, this is evidence that not everything is going bad. Here we got an example of something that's going right for the world. So, okay, so then I guess let's just get right into it. What's behind your reaction? Why Connolly isn't such a huge step forward for the left? Why? Why should we not be so excited?
Well, for one thing, it must be said, she won by a landslide. It was a resounding victory in the polls. And one of the things it shows is that people who voted, they hate the government. The government in Ireland is a coalition of the two parties that have alternated in government in Ireland since independence, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They have run everything in the country, as I said, since independence, with, on occasion, a walk-on part played by either the Irish Labour Party in the past or most recently the Irish Greens. Both the Labour Party and the Greens supported Catherine Connolly. They themselves are part of the political establishment, although they play more of a minor role, and are quite hated by the Irish working class. At the same time, I would say one of the important factors in Connolly's electoral win is that Sinn Fein supported Catherine Connolly and did not put forward their own candidate.
Yeah, I want to ask you to elaborate on that, because that's important, it seems, right? Sinn Fein up until recently was seen as kind of like being on this onwards and upwards trajectory in Irish politics, right? That this was going to be the gradual way to unify Ireland, to have the good times come in, and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, Sinn Fein doesn't put forward its own candidate, even though, as you said, there is huge anger against the two, Tweedledee and Tweedledum parties against the government. So why didn't Sinn Fein see that as an opportunity to take the chance and exploit that anger, I guess?
In one line, Sinn Féin actually arguably had a better candidate in their leader, Mary Lou McDonald. They did not put her forward as a candidate, I'm guessing because she might lose. Because Sinn Féin, in the period since when you talked about, when all of the hopes of the left in Ireland, and by the left I mean the socialist and revolutionary left, all their hopes were invested in Sinn Féin winning the election last year, 2024, forming a government, taking a more pro-Palestine stance, and ushering in a period of a united Ireland through a referendum, a border poll, and so on. And the climate has changed pretty dramatically in the world arena since then, with the second election of Trump. And also the conditions in Ireland that led to the rise of the far right have been exacerbated since then. So Sinn Fein would have feared they would have lost the election, I think.
I guess my question is, what explains the sort of declining fortunes of Sinn Fein? Like, why would people not go for it?
I think two things explain the decline in support for Sinn Fein. They had a lot of liberal and left support. They still retain that. But as it became clear that they might actually form a government in Ireland, they had dropped their opposition to NATO. They went and made nice with the big tech companies in Silicon Valley. And it became clear that if they were to run the government on behalf of the Irish bourgeoisie, they would bow to the dictates of American imperialism, which controls and dominates everything in Ireland. So they lost some liberal support over that. And at the same time, among their base, they lost support to the far right over the question of immigration, because among working class people, the question of there's a lot of anger about the devastation of their lives and livelihoods that happened during the whole period of the heyday of liberalism in the era of globalization. We can talk about that a little bit if you want, but there is an enormous amount of combustible material at the base of society that is ready to explode. They hate the establishment, and that is, in fact, what exploded outside this refugee center at, as you said, 2 days within the election of Catherine Connolly.
Yeah, I would like to go a little bit deeper into this. So you've spoken a little bit already about the heyday of the liberal period, the period of globalization. And Ireland was really the poster child of this model. And it was also devastated pretty badly during the Eurozone crisis. So
Yes.
And of course, I think this is something that was certainly new to me as we were doing work in the party in Ireland, but I did not realize the huge role that American imperialism plays in Ireland and its economy and politics as well. So I would like to go a little bit deeper into that to make sense of the combustible material that you're talking about at the base. So maybe we can talk a little bit about like what drives the economy in the country.
During the period of globalization, when finance capital was sloshing into Ireland, particularly from the United States, you had a spectacular growth period of the Irish economy based on big tech, big pharma. Many of the most commonly sold drugs in the whole world will be produced in Ireland, for example. Amazon, Google, Facebook, you name it, all have their headquarters in Ireland. It is a tax haven for corporations and so on. So its economy was absolutely transformed during the period of the 90s. It had the most spectacular growth figures, kind of off the charts for normal economic analysis. And then with the banking crash of 2008, it had the most spectacular collapse and disaster. And the working class was absolutely bled white to bail out the banks. And they are still suffering the after effects of that. Because in the period of globalization, as happened elsewhere, the economy, infrastructure, and all that, everything looks to be on the up and up. But the working class, especially manual workers and so on, are totally left behind. And it also coincides with a period of very high immigration. So in that period, Ireland, when I was growing up there, which granted is a while ago, was totally white. Irish, and the only ethnic groups involved were Catholics and Protestants, largely speaking. But it went from the 90s until today to a situation where about 20% of the population, originates elsewhere. And that can be anywhere from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa, to, of course, Eastern Europe and so on. So for the impoverished, forgotten, left behind section of the working class, they see this high immigration period. They see that this coincides with the period of when they were devastated, disenfranchised, and feel utterly left behind by the establishment parties, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, the dynamics are similar to what we see happening elsewhere in the world, especially in the West.
Yes.
I mean, maybe not going from a fully white country to 20% foreign origin, but, Britain's quite different in that regard. People from the former colonies, you have this period of growth and the bourgeoisie wants all the immigrants and so on because, hey, who's going to do our jobs? But then when things start going south, then immigrants are the first people to be scapegoated, and I think that is a tale that we're seeing obviously in the US right now, in Canada, in Britain, in Germany, in France. It's kind of the standard thing. So in that sense, it sounds similar. So I guess what exactly is the state? Like, who are some of the figures of this movement? I know Conor McGregor maybe is one of them. Like what's going on? What's the scale of this? What's been the dynamics? And I think the other question I'd like to ask is, obviously you can't talk about Ireland without talking about the Catholic Protestant question, right? So how does that play into that?
Yes. That actually plays into everything. The Irish far-right movement is, in parliamentary terms, it's quite splintered. So it's not like in Britain where you have, Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, and, who can amass a large following. And it doesn't have a very successful or very large parliamentary party at the moment. So it's somewhat splintered, but one of the elements is backed by the Catholic Church. During the Liberal era, one of the things that changed was the Catholic Church's grip on the whole of society was really pushed back. So you had an opening for a limited degree of abortion rights, same-sex marriage and stuff like that. And liberals thought that, the Catholic Church was now defeated in Ireland. I always maintained they never give up their grip on their property and their money, and they will try to make a comeback, and they are. The Catholic Church is behind one of the wings of the Irish right-wing movement. One thing that has been noticeable in the mobilizations of the far right in the South, which didn't start with the City West riot at the time when Catherine Connolly was elected. It's been going on for a few years, very large, very violent. And the Irish far right has been seen marching arm in arm with the Ulster loyalists, in both united in opposition to immigrants. Really, really nasty stuff. So it seems like a contradiction that you have the Irish flag and the Ulster flag, which are historic enemies, marching side by side. And I think it's interesting to look into how is that even possible.
Yeah. I mean, just for context for our listeners, that is something absolutely unheard of, right? Loyalists and Irish far right marching together. Right?
Yes.
You earlier told me this analogy, which made it click for me. I wonder if for the benefit of our listeners, if you give the same, just to see how ludicrous it sounds, but then also to see just like that things have to be bad for this to happen.
Yes, this would be what I said was that this would be the equivalent of the BJP and the Hindutva movement marching in India, marching arm in arm with some Muslim jihadi fighters. It's just kind of, like, in a sense, it's unimaginable.
Exactly, like two fundamentalist sort of movements who want to annihilate the other in some way,
under normal circumstances,
making a block in opposition, in this case in Ireland, to immigration, which kind of gives you a sense of how this question is being used to whip up like crazy amounts of reaction.
Yes. So I suppose I should explain that in Ireland, Ireland was partitioned in 1921 when Southern Ireland, 26 counties, became independent, but Britain retains its hold on 6 counties of Northern Ireland. And the way in which they did that was by playing the divide and rule card, where the Protestant population was coaxed into seeing themselves as loyal to Britain. That's where the term loyalist comes from, against the Catholic minority. And so that divide and rule ploy has led to the partition of the country. So, in fact, if you look at the far-right movement, both in the north and in the south, they are the extreme reactionary version of the status quo. The Ulster loyalists are, extreme reactionaries, anti-Catholics, pro-British, that fought in paramilitary units against the IRA and against the Catholics during the period that was known as the Troubles. But in the South, the far right is also the most reactionary pro-establishment element in the country. During the 1920s, they worked with the British fascists. And today, they have some connections with Tommy Robinson and Britain and so on, but they really take their inspiration also from the MAGA movement, from the American alt-right. And so it does make a certain amount of sense. You know, they pose as anti-establishment, but in fact they're not. The establishment does not always want to have the far right in power, but the far right does represent an extreme version of the views of the establishment and the interests of the establishment. And of course, they take all this discontent in the society that has built up and they direct it against immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in order to build up their movement that way. I don't know if that explains it.
No, definitely. And I mean, so there was this riot that happened, which was triggered, I believe, by the sexual assault of a young person. But even in the last year, there's been at least a couple others, like far-right mobilizations in Dublin, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Well, yes, absolutely. There was one in Coolock some years ago. There have been some also in Northern Ireland. And the one in City West was very violent. It was 1,000 strong, you know, yelling and shouting to people to get out. There was fireworks involved. Police cars burned, stuff like that. It was very violent. Similarly, in Dublin, these are not small affairs. The one in Coolock was very big. And it's not a one-off thing. The one, sometimes they can last 2 or 3 nights. Oh, they targeted this, what's called an IPAS centre. That's the name in Ireland for refugee centre. It's meant to be international protection of people of refugees who are often housed in hotels in very rundown working class areas. And that's what happened in Dublin. That's the type of area that it was in Dublin. And just to mention something about Catherine Connolly's election, like I said, she trounced the other establishment parties with her result, but there was a very large percentage of people in these working class areas who spoiled their ballot. The far right didn't have a candidate in the election. They called for people to spoil their ballot. And in some areas of Dublin, like the one where this racist riot happened, something like 20% of the electorate spoiled their ballots. So the support for the far right was there, even though she had such a resounding success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely helps to see like what's going on beyond the headlines, so to speak.
Yes.
I wanna start coming to the reaction of the left, but I think so far from what you've said is in one sense from the from the left articles, you'd get a sense that the election of Connolly, even though they acknowledge that this is really a rubber stamp position, the presidential office really holds no power.
No.
You would never hear about any other Irish presidents. The last guy was famous because he had 2 cool looking dogs.
Yes.
But all of a sudden we've got this woman, like, good for her. She seems decent. And I think one thing is that she's pro-Palestine, right? Like she opposed the genocide and so on. So, okay, fine, good, but like, I think to just go like crazy rah-rah is really disorienting because what it does, I think, is it ultimately prevents you from seeing like what's really at play in terms of the polarizations happening at the ground. So I think the left presenting this victory as this like, oh my God, look, like another sign of a left-wing move is not helpful in terms of understanding where's Ireland going. And most crucially, I think, like what should leftists be doing in order to build the fight back?
You're absolutely right. It's wishful thinking on the part of the left that the election of Catherine Connolly is turning the tide in Ireland against the rise of the far right. And it just fuels this belief, or rather this illusion that they have that somehow Ireland bucks the trend. Ireland is not so much affected, maybe only a little bit, but it's not going the same way as Britain and the rest of Europe and so on. To really understand the tasks of socialists in Ireland today, I think they have to get those blinkers off and look at what the actual situation is, the situation of the working class, the situation of Ireland, where it stands in the global scheme of things, and just in order to be able to figure out what to do.
Yeah, I think step one, in my mind, to force these blinkers off, I wonder if you can explain a little bit, like, what was the left's reaction? So I think I've been kind of chipping away at what the left's reaction to Connolly's win was. But what did the left say when it came to these riots? Because they did have to acknowledge it, but it was done in a way, I think, that, again, kind of minimized what this represented. So do you want to maybe comment a little bit about, like, what was the reaction?
I think it minimized what it represented. You have kind of two extremes. On the one hand, there's a very liberal wing of the socialist movement who think that anyone who questions the immigration and asylum system is a racist, and you cannot do that. So within People Before Profit, for example, that strain is very much pronounced. So, Can
you just tell us what's People Before Profit?
People Before Profit is the main, let's say, the largest left grouping in Ireland. I call it a grouping because it's kind of a coalition of previous left socialist organizations who came together in an electoral alliance. It exists both in the north and in the south. And as with everything else in Ireland, there's a little bit of a difference in the party. The north is a bit different than the south, but they do have members of parliament. They're called TDs in Dublin. So they represent, if you like, the mainstream of the parliamentarist left in Ireland.
But
so everyone says...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. They and the mainstream of the left, of course, condemned the riots and said that, the blame should go to the government. Everyone, of course, says, understandably, sexual assault on a 10-year-old girl is a horrendous thing, obviously. So let's take the People Before Profit wing. They believe that, I'm making a generalization there, that you cannot question the immigration or asylum system. You cannot say that it's in chaos. That makes you a racist. On the other extreme, that we had the example of the Irish Republican Socialist Party, whose members in Dublin took part in the riot and in the protest against the asylum centre, which was absolutely an atrocity. They justified this by saying that we must be able to talk about immigration. They did it, in fact, because their membership is based among very poor section of the working class population in Dublin. And rather than doing what they should have done as Republicans and socialists, which is to fight to direct this anger towards where it belongs, the Irish establishment and the imperialist powers that dominate Ireland, they joined in making it racist, anti-immigrant mob, basically.
Yeah, I think to me, I find it very interesting how, earlier you talked about the Irish far right marching with the loyalists, two very odd bedfellows.
Yes.
But now you have basically different groups within the socialist movement who are completely at odds. One is basically in the far right riots, and the others are on the completely liberal wing, which again, very, very similar to what's happening in Britain. The minute you even question immigration, they go hysterical and then brand you a racist. And I know,
yes,
I say this because, we've recently written here in our paper, Workers' Hammer in Britain, we've written articles on what's going on in the country. And part of that, of course, hugely is immigration. And some of the reactions we've gotten is that, oh, you're really playing into the right wing, sort of, you're soft on the backward working class. Well, I think the basic answer is, well, this is an issue. To talk about it doesn't make you a right winger, but also to ignore it doesn't actually make the problem go away either, right?
Yes. If I could just say one more thing that is noticeable about the reaction of the left. So you have these two polar opposites that I mentioned, and there are some shades in between. But what no group offered is, what should they say to the working class other than that this is not your enemy? Like, there was no strategy coming from any group about how to really tackle this other than liberalism, liberal anti-racism, or, just kind of platitudes about how, which are true, migrants are not the enemy, but that is not a strategy forward for the working class. And I think that also reflects the left in Ireland, as is the case in Britain, is so divorced from the working class that they don't see this as part of their task to, to map a way forward for what to do in this situation.
As you've painted this sort of picture of how the establishment has really devastated the country, by totally subordinating the country to American imperialism and the EU, you get a picture of like where the left is at. Totally liberal. You can't question immigration. And the right obviously is taking advantage of this and so on. I want to bring the conversation back to Sinn Fein because, as we touched on earlier, it was until recently, seen as sort of on the cusp of power. So where does Sinn Fein fit into all of these dynamics that you've been painting?
Well, Sinn Fein was indeed on the cusp of power, as you say, but their timing was wrong because the world changed before they managed to get themselves elected. But they were the centerpiece of liberalism in Ireland. They presented themselves as the anti-establishment party in the liberal era. They got a lot of support from the working class, from many sections of society. They were demonized by the establishment parties because of their Republican past, because of their links with the IRA. This is, has always been a stick to beat them with. It reached a point where the more the establishment beat them with that stick, the more the working class supported them. But then, and the left, I mentioned People Before Profit, all the mainstream socialist groups in Ireland supported Sinn Fein and saw the way forward as what they called a left government, which would be led by Sinn Fein in some kind of coalition or some kind of deal with People Before Profit, and other organizations. But with a shift to the right in society and the shift to the right in the working class, especially focused over immigration, Sinn Fein started to lose its base. And as I said, the timing was against them because with Donald Trump's second term, what you have to understand is that Ireland is so completely dependent on American investment that they sit on tenterhooks waiting to see how the protectionism of the Trump administration will affect Ireland. Will these big tech companies, big pharma, will they pull out? What will happen? It's utterly dependent on the whims of American imperialism.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't made that connection, like with Trump going totally tariff crazy, what that would mean in terms of some of the, I guess, major investors in the Irish economy. But to bring it back to Sinn Fein, so why is it what were the arguments or rationales for the left backing Sinn Fein? I mean, because typically you get lots of very like sectarian arguments like, oh, but they're bourgeois or this and that. So what explains the left sort of wholesale supporting Sinn Fein? Was it?
Well, yeah. So you have coalition of, as I mentioned, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, who, of course, does the bidding of American imperialism in every single way. That means backing Zionism and the genocide in Palestine. It means supporting NATO, drawing Ireland much closer to NATO. And it means doing the bidding of these large corporations that make vast profits, generate vast wealth out of their investments in Ireland. So the Irish population, very sympathetic to the Palestinian struggle. Sinn Fein, when they were in opposition, was able to lean into that and to be pro-Palestine, to be against NATO until such time as they looked like they might actually enter government. So they abandoned their opposition to NATO. And as I said earlier, they, had to go and court the CEOs of the major American corporations. There's a very clear link, in fact, between American imperialist militarism and its corporate interests in Ireland. A lot of the big tech giants which are based in Ireland, are very dependent on these undersea cables. Many of them make landfall in Ireland. The United States has wanted Ireland to join NATO since NATO was set up in 1949. Ireland did not agree to do that because it means accepting partition. They didn't want to be in a common military alliance with Britain for understandable reasons. But over the years, they have moved closer and closer to NATO with military agreements such as what's called Partnership for Peace and all this kind of thing, And the Irish population really wants to maintain what they see as Ireland's neutrality from these military arrangements. Now, that's constantly being eroded all the time. But what this points to is the need for the Irish left, instead of tailing Sinn Fein, which has inched closer and closer to the establishment on all of these red line questions, what they should be doing is build an anti-imperialist movement in Ireland that says down with NATO, out of the Partnership for Peace, American military base out of Shannon Airport, and take a clear stand against American imperialism and against all the European Union's military arrangements as well. And they don't do that. That's part of the alliance. Tailing Sinn Fein, promoting liberal illusions in Ireland's neutrality and so on, is counterposed to that.
Yeah, you've kind of just beat me to it, but I was going to start bringing us to a discussion. That's okay. To a discussion of what should the left do? How do we understand our tasks? We try and get out to Dublin every once in a while to do some work, but there is a particular political understanding that we have that you're trying to lay out. We see our tasks as well as the tasks, we have proposals for other leftists on the ground in Ireland, what to do in this situation where, okay, fine, Connolly won, fine. But if you really look behind all of that, things are not right. Yes. And I think you've been explaining that. And I think, again, it's really very unhelpful to take individual countries and pluck them out of the international context, right? And then just project your own hysteria on these developments. So to really put Ireland in the international situation, to understand its dynamics, the hatred against the establishment, which is right now being taken advantage of by the right, which is on a steady sort of march. The left seems either totally continuing on a liberal course or, unfortunately and scandalously, making a block in these far-right protests. So I guess my question, to put it more precisely, is what are the tasks? So you've already touched on the first one, which is build an anti-imperialist pole in the socialist left. The Irish left needs to break with all this nonsense and actually draw a clear line against imperialism, American imperialism, the EU and Britain, in order to reassert those red lines for the Irish bourgeoisie. That means getting out of NATO, down with this peace partnership, which is a total illusion. And I think crucially calling for the American bases out of Shannon Airport. So that's one plank for what we fight for in Ireland. We've got a couple of others.
Yes.
I wonder if you want to elaborate on those.
Yes. The other one is against British imperialism. In fact, it's noticeable recently, some old British military figures, even retired ones, have been coming out of the woodwork and talking about how Ireland needs to get into NATO, or at least Britain needs to hold on to Northern Ireland because Ireland is so hostile to NATO that, and after all, NATO protects Ireland from the evil Russians and stuff like this. Oh my. So the second plank that the Irish left needs to fight for is against British imperialism and for Irish unification. And there's a number of reasons to do this, because the sentiment for Irish unification is clearly there in the north and in the south. And at the moment, it's, with the default of the left in taking up this issue, it is being left to Sinn Fein and liberal illusions that's by some gradual process, Britain will grant Ireland, Northern Ireland that is, a referendum, and they will be allowed to vote. The majority in Northern Ireland will vote, and then Britain will simply walk away and give back those 6 counties that they have held for centuries. And so we proposed a border poll an immediate border poll in Ireland, north and south, not because we think that, you'll get a united Ireland by a vote. Our perspective is for an united Irish Workers' Republic. You'll not get that by a vote, but it is a way to channel the progressive sentiment of the population to kick the British out of Northern Ireland. We said it should be both North and South. Why should the South not be allowed to vote to reunify their country? But it also undercuts liberal illusions in Sinn Fein that this will happen by a gradual process, as if one day Keir Starmer will wake up and say, it seems the Irish would like to kick our ass out of the 6 counties. And if only I'd thought of it, I would have let them vote on it, ages ago. But so let them have a vote on it. After all, it sort of assumes that the British are only there to keep the 2 warring factions apart, which is crazy. So
I think it's a total capitulation to the Good Friday Agreement, right? Like that Britain's role is there to keep these 2 crazy, bloody, sectarian, warring groups, to keep them sane and
destroying
in their
each other.
Little, yeah, it's a total, complete capitulation. I think that the thing I'd like to insist on is exactly as you're saying, like instead of waiting, because you could be waiting for a long time for Sinn Fein.
Yes.
The way things are going. You could be waiting for a while. But I think the point is like our job is to give direction to this sentiment, right? This sentiment, this felt need in the Irish population, both North and South, that they want to unify their country. So why should that very progressive task, why should that wait? Why should it wait for British imperialism, for Sinn Fein, which cannot get its act together and which is actually losing ground as we speak? So somebody has to step in to give direction to these sentiments. And
absolutely,
if not us, then who? And I think that's kind of our call to the socialist left, actually, the Republican socialists and all of those guys. Let's fight to build this movement for a border poll, because that's the best way to actually show the imperialists, show the establishment that the people are serious. And that's actually the way to, I guess, I'm not sure, initiate, but to really actually push the fight for unification forward instead of kicking it down the road to another day.
Yes, absolutely. And it would do an enormous amount to undercut liberal illusions that have been fostered by the left in Ireland for a long time. In fact, if you think about it, the left's tailing of Sinn Fein, which has gone on now for 10 years or more, I don't know exactly how long. What it means is that the pacifist sentiment in the population, that means they don't support NATO, they don't want Ireland to be in NATO, that is being channeled into illusions that the Irish government, if you get the right kind of Irish government, will somehow keep Ireland out of NATO, which is just not the case. Those progressive sentiments are being squandered. And likewise, very strong sentiment for unification of Ireland, for a united Ireland, is being left sitting on ice, waiting for this gradual process. In fact, we had a little sign at the kneecap protests in London. We had a banner that said, Free Palestine, Free Ireland, Free Kneecap. And I also had a little sign in Irish calling for a referendum now in the Irish language, which also said Tamid Marav ag Fanacht. That means we have died while we're waiting for this referendum to be allowed.
True. Yeah.
It's something that the left should take up. Every left group in Ireland, or almost every socialist group in Ireland, claims to be for a united Ireland. But again, waiting for Sinn Fein to do it, waiting for some gradual process by which the British government will allow this to happen, will just peacefully give up, the 6 counties that they've held by military force for centuries. It's very important to undercut that.
Yeah. Speaking as somebody from the subcontinent, which the British also partitioned, I mean, nothing could be like, I don't even know the words, it gives me so much joy to give the British the boot in that way,
Yes.
To reunify the country they split, You can't do that with India and Pakistan, so my hopes are on Ireland.
No. Yes, but just being as you're from the subcontinent, I mean, the very word partition just brings up emotions that it's very hard to find words for. You know, it's hated in Ireland. It's hated. And it is something that, the left should take up, the fight against it. But that does mean that you have to win over the Protestant working class and the Protestant population to it. However, I think that also brings us to the other thing that's really missing from what the left in Ireland is currently doing, and that is an orientation towards the organized working class, including in the South. It just seems to be totally missing. The Irish working class has a tradition, a history of incredible militancy. You know, they were led in the past by James Connolly, Jim Larkin, and they were very, very militant. But in the period of globalization, the trade union movement in Ireland took a huge hit, especially in the private sector, partly because of jobs where, like elsewhere, most people are not unionized, or many are not unionized. Also in the private sector, many are not unionized. The big tech and big pharma companies, union density is very low. I don't know the exact details, but the trade union movement has been very significantly weakened. But part of the problem is the trade union leadership in Ireland has not only done nothing to defend the working class against that assault that they've been undergoing for a few decades. At the time of the crash in 2008, which we mentioned earlier, they signed an agreement that, Ireland is not like Greece. Like in Greece, at least the KKA organized strikes to defend the Greek population, the Greek working class against the EU. No, the Irish trade union bureaucracy, they signed a deal that the Irish working class will just eat it. There will be no strikes. It was called the Croke Park Agreement. The Irish working class has not recovered from that since then. The austerity that was inflicted on them to bail out the banks, talk about a dependent country. Ireland had to bail out the Irish banks. They had to pay off in full the debts of the Irish banks. Guess where they were owed to? It was all owed to foreign banks. So they paid way higher as a percentage per head than any other country in Europe, I believe. It was horrendous.
So the trade union movement.
Yes.
Actually, first the bureaucracy. I did not know about this agreement. Basically, that we're gonna lay down, so that you can roll over us. I did not know that. That seems quite wretched. So really, there needs to be a real struggle to rebuild the unions, crucially in opposition to this bureaucracy that has helped to really weaken the labor movement.
Exactly. And that is patient work that needs to be done in order to reestablish the trade unions so that they come to be seen by their members as organizations that can fight in their defense, fight on their behalf. Because the trade union leadership has been part of the establishment and seen as part of the establishment. And so, if you want to talk about how to undercut the rise of the far right, there is some serious work that needs to be done by the left in the trade union movement to win the working class back. It's not no magic wand that you can wave over this question. But that means serious opposition to this trade union bureaucracy, which if I can mention, the Irish trade union bureaucracy was involved in producing a film about the life of James Connolly recently.
Yeah, right. I know where you're going. Go on.
If I may indulge.
Yeah, please.
If you will indulge me. And I organized for a number of comrades to go and see this film on James Connolly without ever reading a review, because how could you make a terrible film about the life of James Connolly? What could possibly go wrong? This was absolutely awful. It was shameful. The theme of the film was, a parade of talking heads trying to claim the mantle of James Connolly and his fight for the Irish working class. They tried to turn Connolly into a common liberal and tried to, bathe themselves in some of his glory. It's difficult to say what the worst part of this film was, but I'll give you some of the lowlights.
Yeah, go on.
So they barely mention that, like, British imperialism didn't feature at all. No, there was no British imperialism in it in a documentary on James Connolly. They did have to mention the Easter Rising because, after all, Connolly went in. He was one of the leaders of the Easter Rising. They had to say he had a citizen army, but they actually went so far as to say, this I think was the worst part. They said that it was good that the rest of the country did not join Dublin in the Rising, and that this meant it was over quite quickly. So, at that point, I felt like walking out.
Mm-hmm.
They had all the anti-Republican themes that is standard practice in the Irish establishment. Some of these people are socialists, some of these trade union bureaucrats. One from the north said that, oh yes, about Connolly, there's and republicanism, there's a narrative and a counter narrative. In other words, some people support British occupation of the North and some people don't. It was just reduced to narrative and counter narrative. It was pretty terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm glad you went there, just because in preparing for this podcast, I stumbled upon a review of the documentary by none other than Niall Mulholland. I don't know if you've read it.
No.
It's a review published on the 14th of November. And this is called We Only Want the Earth, The Life and Ideas of James Connolly. Yeah.
Thank you.
The punchlines of Mulholland's review is, quote, James Connolly is reframed as a socialist revolutionary and workers' leader, not just as an Easter 1916 martyr, connecting his ideas to modern Irish issues. And then he goes on to take a little bit of issue, saying the documentary dilutes the Marxist essence of his politics. But I mean, I heard you rant about this, and then I read this review, so I was a bit surprised, to say the least.
I have, in fact, ranted to Niall Mulholland about the very same question. He claimed to agree with me, but I did not read his review. So, yes, but it was, it says a lot about the Irish trade union bureaucracy that they could make such a terrible film about Connolly, and at the same time that they feel the need to try to bask in the glory of James Connolly to make up for their own sins, which has driven their own membership down to a level that hasn't, it's down to a very low level. So I think they're probably desperate as well.
I think that's really well put. I think a way to kind of, shore up their image. And who else to do it with than one of the greatest heroes of the Irish?
Yes.
I think that's a really nice way to cap off our discussion. I do have one last question for you, which I'm asking because I personally think you're very good at one-liners. But I was just wondering, I think we've kind of burst this bubble of the Connolly brouhaha. I was just wondering, say some leftist actually sat and listened through this and was like, the Sparts are crazy. What do you have to say to somebody who listened to this and thinks that we're just being pessimistic and negative, and we just don't understand what's going on?
I think that's a good question, because sometimes what the left thinks is if you don't say rah, 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 everything's going ever onwards and upwards, that there is nothing that the left can do. But honestly, you need to start with reality. You need to start with a reality check. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that even while Catherine Connolly sits in Ars an Uachtaráin doing nothing much, yes, she's a nice woman and all the rest of it, this is not going to fundamentally change things in Ireland. And, in fact, another comrade described it to me as kind of the dead cat bounce of Irish liberalism. It's like trying to cling to the glory days as they see it of the liberal era. So no, there is work for the left to do. They should do it, but get the blinkers off. Look at Ireland as it really is. Look at the situation of Ireland in the world. Look at its connection to American imperialism. I kind of feel like it doesn't even need saying. Everybody in Ireland knows that. Look at Donald Trump. This is what's driving world politics. And you tell me that the election of an Irish president with no powers, who's a nice woman and she likes Palestine and stuff like that, is going to turn the tide? I don't think so.
Yeah. Well put.
Who's crazy then,
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's you. Okay. Cool. Well, look, I've had an absolutely lovely time getting into some of the nitty-gritty of what's happening in Ireland today, and actually in recent decades. So it was very educational for me. Thank you so much for making the time. Is there anything you want to end with? Anything?
Thank you. No, I'm very happy that you wanted to do this podcast. It's been a lot of fun for me. There's a lot of things to say.
Yeah, I do want to plug. You wrote you wrote an article in the recent issue of Spartacist on Ireland. Do you want to maybe just motivate that article? Because I think that's a really good read. And there's a video to go with it. I'll link it in the show notes. It's on the Workers' Hammer YouTube channel. But you want to just maybe one-liner?
Yes. Part of our reorientation in the ICL, we changed our whole attitude on the national question, permanent revolution. And actually, there's a very good article in the current Workers' Hammer, rejecting our old position as outlined in Thesis on Ireland by Comrade Perot. Maybe we could link that as well.
Yeah.
We have our border poll leaflet, Border Poll Now, which is also in Workers' Hammer. But the article in Spartacist is what replaces our old position. It's the fight for an Irish Workers' Republic. It goes back to Wolfe Tone and the United Irishmen, making the point that the struggle for Irish liberation did not start out as a sectarian movement, but as a united Republican struggle of Protestants and Catholics. It makes the point, which you will not read anywhere else, that in order to win over the Protestants to the perspective of a united Ireland, that they are actually Irish people. The clue is in Wolfe Tone's movement, the United Irishmen, which was Protestant-led. The clue is in the name, United Irishmen. And so it also makes the analogy between Sinn Fein that's signing the Good Friday Agreement, which you mentioned earlier on, and Michael Collins signing the treaty that partitioned Ireland 1921. So, it's a good read.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for mentioning it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that article is really key to understand the national question in Ireland, especially I think the really thorny question of what are the Protestants, which is I think the thing that a lot of the left trips on their way to capitulating to British imperialism. Having dropped that bomb, I think we'll call it a day here. If you wanna read up on our understanding of why the Protestants are Irish, please go check out the article or give us a shout on our various channels. Thank you, Eibhlin, so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mansa. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Okay, cool. All right, see you guys.
Yeah.